How's it going, everybody? This one is a tutorial about filmmaking, about how to take video and the basics of it and all that kind of stuff. I recorded this video at the end of 2019. That was quite some time ago. I managed to edit it to a video which I think can be helpful to people that don't know. And yes, apart from that, I just want to mention I haven't been cutting my hair for 1 year. Since I started a series called Learn Filmmaking from the Start, I wanted to cover up all the basics. So in this video I want to talk about the basics of video. So I've already done a couple of videos on how to take a manual photo, which is important to know because it's the first step of getting into video. So when you think about video, it's basically just 24 pictures taken inside of 1 second, which makes up the video, or at least 1 second of it. And 24 is, when you take videos or when you watch videos, is kind of the guideline. So you split up this 1 second into 24 individual frames. And every frame is produced by the shutter speed, the f-stop and the ISO, just like the normal picture you take on the camera. So you can actually go out and take 24 different pictures. It would be a video basically. But since you know how to take one frame or one picture, you can take the concept up further and think about the whole second of video. How is that taken? How's the manual setting for all the individual photos inside of this second? And so you have like a general setting for the video, which is going to apply to all the single frames you're going to, take inside of your video. So when you take your video, there's a key thing that you can memorize, which I just realized, which makes it for the explanation a lot easier because I'm kind of struggling right now. When going from those 24 frames inside of a second towards taking a video and having the general setting for the whole video, you've got another setting on top of that because you've chosen to have 24 seconds inside of your frame. You can actually have more. You can have 60 frames inside of your second and create a slow motion effect when you slow it down in post. But I'm not going to talk about that right now. So you have the option of various frame rates for your video. So first of all, you think of how many frames do I actually have inside of a second. And then you can think of the global settings for this 24 frames per second video. And those global settings will be kind of easy for video. So we want to start with the shutter speed, the global setting of the shutter speed. You will have aperture and ISO later, but that will be easy. Shutter speed is easy too, because it's double the amount of the frame rate. You just set your frame rate to 24 frames per second, and now you double that and have your shutter speed pretty much. Double the amount of 24 is 48. So for each individual picture, you will dial in 1/48th of a second for the whole video. If you have the option inside of your video to put in a 180-degree shutter rule, which is called like that, which basically means that it doubles the shutter speed and it will automatically change back and forth when you change the frame rate, which is nice. Why do you do that? Because it's basically the standard for most videos. You obviously can go higher and lower with your shutter speed for artistic reasons or for light reasons maybe, but the standard for the best motion blur is gonna be double the amount of your frame rate. So if you shoot 60 frames per second, you wanna have the shutter speed of 120th of a second. If you shoot 30 frames per second, you will have a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. And 24 frames per second, you will have the shutter speed of 1/48th of a second. And since you will have this set parameter, which is mostly the same when you take the same videos. The first one is crossed off the list. You don't have to think about shutter speed because it's the double the amount of your frame rate that you have set in the first place. One last addition to the shutter speed. When you've watched my previous video about taking manual photos, you know the impact that the shutter actually has on an image, and the same thing goes for the video because you'll have the best amount of motion blur when you dial in the correct settings of double the amount of your frame rate, but you can go higher or lower and have it really choppy or like really blurry. That's just something to think about, but to make it easy to start with, just go for double the amount of your frame rate to take normal video. Now we're gonna go to the aperture. And since you've watched the previous video of taking manual photo, you kind of know what the aperture does towards your depth of field for, the focus range, and as well for the light that comes in towards the sensor. And because the aperture is inside of your lens, it only affects those two parameters for video, which is pretty much the same as it would be for your photo. The only thing that really stands out for the video is that it will be the main indicator of how much light your video is going to receive, because the shutter speed is set. You can go higher and lower, but you can't affect the light that comes towards the sensor with the shutter speed. You know, you can only go with the frame rate up or down if you want to keep sticking to the rule, because motion will look best with this rule. So to keep going with aperture, you will be able to affect how bright or dark the video will get with, you know, closing or opening up the aperture. If it's really dark inside, you want to open it up. And if it's really bright outside, you want to close it down again, just like with the manual photo I talked about in previous videos. You know all that. If not, just go back and look it up. So aperture is kind of an easy one as well. When you think about it, you have the frame rate, you've got your shutter speed, and you've got your aperture. On top of the depth of field, it will only brighten or darken the image of your video. And that's it. For the last one, which is going to be ISO, that one is pretty simple too. ISO has the same characteristics as with the manual photo. You can go back, watch the video, know all about it. When you have a high ISO, it will have the same effect. You'll get a noisy image. And if you keep your ISO as low as possible, you'll have a cleaner image. And ISO, as you know, for the manual photo, will increase the brightness of the video. And since that we have now covered the basic settings that you can have for your video, we're pretty much done. You've got your frame rate settings for the video, how many frames you want to have in a second. Then you've got your shutter speed, which is pretty much set for the 180-degree rule. And you've got your aperture, which you can open or close depending on how much light you want to let the sensor receive. And then you have the ISO, which is going to brighten up your image if you need it. But since the ISO, you want to have it as low as possible, you don't have to think about the ISO. And since the shutter speed is double your frame rate, you don't really need to think about that either. So there's only one thing left, the aperture. So when you've set your frame rate, there's only one thing to worry about, which is the aperture. On top of that, you can think about white balance, which I didn't cover in the photo video either. And I'm just gonna, you know, quickly talk about it in this video. Most cameras have an automatic white balance that is pretty good, but if you really wanna get the most out of your manual photography game or videography game, check out manual white balance as well. I haven't done it so far. I really should do it more often, especially when I do long interviews. You want to have it set so that your camera can't really hop in there, and especially when you do the grading afterwards, it will stay the same for the whole video. That's something I just recently discovered I should do more often, but basically most cameras can do it really good, the white balance. And now for as conclusion, I want to talk a little bit about, you know, a couple of scenarios that you could have outside or inside to show you how easy it is. So I've already done this inside example of how you would take a photo inside. You lower it down to 24 frames per second because, you know, there's not much light available. You've put in that 180-degree shutter rule, which is 1/48 of a second. And now you've opened up your aperture all the way to like f2.8 or something. The most that your camera can do. And now there's only one thing left. You increase the ISO until you see too much noise or the image is good enough or bright enough so you can actually see something. I've already made this example, but the other example on the other hand would be if you're outside, it's really freaking bright, you can barely see. First thing you do is, it's too bright. I'm gonna increase the aperture. You pump up the aperture to f22, but it's still too bright. And obviously your ISO is already down to 100 or 200, whatever the native is of your camera, because you don't want any noise. And you know, why would you need the ISO? Because it only brightens the image, and you don't want to have a bright image because it's already so bright outside. So the next thing would be to maybe have a higher frame rate when you want to shoot video. You could go to 60 frames per second, which will make your image darker as well. But there's one thing in video which comes in handy when it's too bright outside, which is an ND filter. So think about it. You don't want to go up with your frame rate because you like the look of 24 frames per second and the motion blur, and you don't want to change your 180-degree shutter rule. So there's only one option, an ND filter, which is kind of like sunglasses for your camera lens. Just put on sunnies. There's good ones and bad ones, there's variable ones and all that kind of stuff, but I'm just putting it out there so that you have heard of it. So that was pretty much it. I kind of hope the video wasn't all over the place. I try to, you know, take things out of my memory and hope it makes sense. One of the next videos will be all about slow motion and time-lapse because I didn't cover that in this video. I'm gonna stop here and hopefully there was something good in there, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!